Well, we don't have a priest with us at the moment, so let's just start with a Hail Mary. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Hail Mary, full of grace, blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. First of all, I can't thank you all enough for coming. I don't think I can really express or describe what a pleasure and what a treat it is to be in this position. I don't know how to describe it, but just being able to, I don't know what the word is, evangelize or enkindle faith a little bit or something. And I don't know why God gave me this privilege, but it's a great privilege, and it only exists because you're here. So anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Anyway, and today's talk, I'm tempted to say, is close. In some sense, it's my favorite because it is simply a celebration of the gift that we have in the Catholic Church. And a little bit through my words, and I've given you some of them earlier this weekend, and a little bit through the words of other Jews who have found the fullness of Judaism, the completion of Judaism, the purpose of Judaism, in fact, in the Catholic Church and the sacraments. Now, I mentioned already Friday night in my first talk that I don't even see how someone can logically consider it a conversion to go from Judaism to the Catholic Church. It can't possibly be a conversion because one is simply following the path of Judaism up until the point of the coming of the Messiah, and then following the path after the coming of the Jewish Messiah. So, all I did was go from being a Jew who was wrong about who Jesus was to being a Jew who was right about who Jesus was. So that should make me more Jewish than ever. The Jews are supposed to be right about everything, right? And also, if I was Jewish before I entered the Catholic Church, and Jesus was the Jewish Messiah, how could a Jew stop being Jewish by becoming a follower of the Jewish Messiah? That too should make him more Jewish than ever. And this is not only, the way I see things, but it's actually the way that every other Jewish entrant in the Catholic Church. I mean, I don't mind being called a convert, but if I'm actually have a clean sheet of paper in which to say what I call myself a Jewish entrant into the Catholic Church. And this is the way that every other Jewish entrant into the Catholic Church that I've ever met or heard about or read about also sees it. So let me read a few quotes of a few others that reflect the same attitude. First of all, Cardinal Archbishop Lustiger, who was the Cardinal Archbishop of Paris until he died. Actually, he retired shortly before he died, but he died about 10 years ago. He was also a Jewish convert. And these are his words. I explained to my father that baptism would not make me abandon my Jewish condition. Quite the contrary. It would lead me to find it, to receive the fullness of its meaning. I did not have the feeling that I was betraying my heritage or abandoning anything whatsoever. Just the opposite. I felt that I was going to find the import, the meaning of what I had received at birth. I did nothing more than begin to enjoy the heritage that had been promised to me. Right? And that's exactly what the Catholic Church is. It's a heritage that was promised to the Jews, right? I mentioned this before too, but one of the things that some people say, who say that Jews don't have to be evangelized, is they don't need Christ because God is faithful to his promises. Well, Christ was his promise. That was the whole point of the promises. That's what he promised, and he gave it to us. I don't know if this is going to come across, but, to say, well, no, I'm not going to, it's too complicated. But the image I have in mind about that is if a father promises his son, a Ferrari when he turns 18, and he wakes up on his birthday and there is this bright yellow Ferrari in the driveway, and the son said, I didn't want a yellow one, I wanted a red one. You're unfaithful to your promise. you know, that's nonsense, right? I mean, Jesus was the promise that was promised to the Jews, and if they don't realize that, it doesn't mean that God wasn't faithful to his promises. It just means that they did not recognize the fulfillment of the promise. Anyway, back to Le Sujet. Christianity is the continuation of Judaism. Christianity is a fruit of Judaism. Until the Messiah's coming in glory, the Jew remains, and he remains a Jew, whether he is Christian or not. This isn't terribly important to non-Jews, I suppose, but in evangelizing Jews, it's very important for them to understand that they don't stop being Jewish when they enter the Catholic Church. I think it would be impossible and very difficult to tell an Irishman that he somehow stops being Irish, you know, or a Scot that he stops being Scot. I mean, that wouldn't make any sense to them. And in a similar way, you know, it's kind of impossible for a Jew to understand the concept of stopping being a Jew. So once he understands that he's no less Jewish when he enters the Catholic Church, it actually makes it much easier. So a barrier to conversion which drops. Now, Rabbi Zolli was the chief rabbi of Rome at the time of World War II. And he entered the Catholic Church right after the war. And in fact, when he was baptized Catholic, he took the baptismal name Eugenio to honor Pope Pius XII, whose birth name was Eugenio, in thanksgiving for all that Pius XII had done to save the Jews of Rome during World War II. And the Jewish world says he converted because of, basically because he wanted an easier life or something. Nothing would be further from the truth, of course, because he lost everything when he converted. But he also wrote his autobiography. His conversion story is actually in Salvations from the Jews. He converted in part because when he was celebrating the Yom Kippur service, Yom Kippur is the most solemn day of the year, right? You know, it's the biggest liturgical event of the Jewish calendar. It's the Day of Atonement. It's a day of full fasting and prayer from morning till night. He was celebrating it as the chief rabbi of Rome from the pulpit, and he looked up, and the congregation disappeared, and he saw Jesus walking towards him, and Jesus said to him, essentially said, this is the last time you'll be doing this. And he assented. He gave his assent. And then, you know, and then he entered the Catholic Church. Anyway, here's a quote from him. Christianity is the integration, completion, or crown of the synagogue. For the synagogue was a promise, and Christianity is the fulfillment of that promise. The synagogue pointed to Christianity. Christianity presupposes the synagogue. What I converted to was the living Christianity. Now, this is a little bit of a different situation, but this is David Goldstein. He was a communist organizer in the United States in the 1930s and 1940s. He was a atheist Jewish communist organizer, and he crisscrossed the country in a car and would stop in every town and preach communism essentially from the back of the car. And he converted to Catholicism, and he continued to do the same thing, preaching Catholicism from the back of his car as he crisscrossed the country. He was very kind of fiery character. And he wrote, nothing but the acceptance of Christian doctrine can avail the Jews, for the fulfillment of the old law is the foundation of the Catholic Church. Arthur Kleiber, who was a sailor, he was in the Navy right after World War II, and he became Catholic, and he writes his stories in Honey from the Rock. My baptism was followed by an intense interior joy which defies description. A Jew who has become a Christian loves his people more than ever. He wishes for them with all his heart the saving faith which he himself has received. Completed Jews have become what all Jews expect to become when the Messiah arrives. Which is exactly right, of course. And of course, that's why, I mean, it's very self-serving to say, but that's why I'm doing this. It's precisely out of that love for my own people and my wish for them with all my heart that they receive the saving faith which I did. It's not only saving faith, by the way, which would be enough, and it's not only eternal life, which would be enough, and it's not only the best possible eternity, which would be enough, but it's also actually life, happiness and life on earth between birth and death. Because, and I mentioned this a little bit, but I mean, growing up I was in agony about all those questions. Like, actually, one of them, which really bothered me the most when I became a young adult, is why be good? Why be good? You know, you have your conscience telling you to be good, but you, at the same time, you know, if we're just a chemical accident and if we just die, then why not be completely selfish? That was, I mean, that's just one little thing. Certainly, you know, just everything. Because it gets corny, you know, why do bad things happen to good people? How can there be a good God who's all-powerful and yet there's so much suffering? You know, all of these questions which actually torment the human soul, and the answers are there in the Penny Catechism. You know, and you as cradle Catholics, one of the good things about being a cradle Catholic is even if you fall away from the faith, and even if you live in a state of mortal sin, at some point in your life you've been at least told the answers to these questions, I think. No? Maybe not anymore. Maybe not anymore. Maybe I'm dreaming. Well, anyway, everyone should be forced to read a Penny Catechism, but I guess they're not. Some of you have mentioned Rosalind Moss to me. She's probably the highest profile Jewish Catholic convert running around evangelizing these days. And she actually now has a different name. It's Mother Miriam of the Lamb of God. She started a religious order. And this is a short quote from her. I know this sounds like I'm trying to peddle my book, but that's only because I am trying to peddle my book. Her witness testimony is in Honey from the Rock also. So this is an extract from that. In the fullness of Judaism, which is the Catholic Church, I now have the whole Christ, all that God has given in giving us His church, the sacraments, the communion of saints, a mother, a Jewish mother, the mother of the Jewish Messiah, and above all, the unbelievable condescension of a God who not only gave Himself for us on Calvary, but who even gives Himself to us as our daily food. Christianity is not a Gentile religion. It is a Jewish religion that was given to encompass the entire world and every soul in it. It is looked upon as a Gentile faith in today's world because most of the world is Gentile, and Christianity has spread throughout the earth as well it should. But it was begun by a Jewish carpenter who was God with us and who came to His own, that's a quote from John 1, i.e. the Jewish people. His followers were all Jewish. Christianity was looked upon as a Jewish sect in the first century. The question then was, do you have to first be Jewish to believe in Jesus? The answer to that question was no, but the first Christians were solely Jews who were doing a very Jewish thing following the Jewish Messiah. The church was founded on Israel on 12 Jewish disciples. Some Catholic theologians, against all church teaching, teach that the Jewish people today can be saved under the covenant which God made with Moses. God is faithful to His promises, they say. But of course God is faithful to His promises. That is precisely why He sent the promised Messiah. How unthinkable it is to any Jew that the Messiah would come for everyone but Israel. Would He come through the Jews but not for the Jews? Can we love the Jewish people and withhold from them the knowledge of the very deliverer they gave to the world? If Christ is not the Messiah of the Jewish people, He is no one's Messiah. Obviously, one of the things I'm pushing for is that we should care about the conversion of the Jews and everyone's prayer, of course, is entirely between them and God and what they're moved to do. But I certainly want to alert people to the possibility of perhaps praying for the conversion of the Jews and caring about the conversion of the Jews, and actually also, by the way, evangelizing Jews who enter into your life or cross paths with you. In the United States, when I speak to a group of Catholics, frankly, many of them have Jewish sons-in-law or daughters-in-law and so forth. I don't know if it's quite the same here. They certainly have Jewish co-workers, and usually their doctors are Jewish, or their accountants are Jewish, or someone. And it doesn't take much, really, I think, to evangelize anybody, including Jews. And the heart of evangelization is, of course, first of all, to love them, and second of all, to let them know why you are who you are, so to speak. In other words, if you are, happy when people around you are glum, and you're happy because, well, here's an example. You're happy because you go to work having just come from Mass and just having received Holy Communion, or if some disaster occurs and you have an inner peace that strikes them as odd, and that inner peace comes from the fact that you know about divine providence, or you have the comfort of the Blessed Virgin Mary, or you know that this life is a vale of tears on the way to eternal bliss, or whatever, just to let them know why you are who you are and where it comes from. And that's completely subjective to you, right? It's not beating them over the head. But at the same time, that's what everybody wants. In other words, that aspect of your behavior or of your inner peace, everybody else really, really wants. And so if they know it's connected to your Catholic faith and your Catholic life, it opens a door there, or it makes a kind of plants a seed that might only bear fruit, decades later. I'll tell this conversion story of Edith Stein. You all know Edith Stein? Yeah. And I do have, by the way, I mentioned this at the Seder. I was remiss in not handing them out before to some extent. But I have these prayer cards with Edith Stein on the front, and on the back, the prayer for the conversion of the Jews that I read at the Seder. And, I have enough for everyone, and I'll pass them out. If I pass them out now, it'll keep you from listening to what I'm saying. Pass them out later. But anyway, some of her conversion you're probably familiar with, but some of it maybe not, because there were two early stages of her conversion that are less well known. The first stage of her conversion was when she was in her very early 20s. She was walking in a crowded city, and she just saw this elderly woman carrying two very heavy shopping bags, very exhausted, obviously tired, walking down the street, who turned into an empty church and sat down to pray. And I don't know if I have her words here. I don't. Anyway, she said that this was something totally new to her. Here this woman, who was clearly kind of worn out by the world, went in to sit down as though she was just talking to an intimate friend. And she had never seen anything like this before. In the Protestant world and in the Jewish world, people going to the church or going to the synagogue to recite prayers, but not this, heart-to-heart relationship. And it stuck in her mind. And then the next really big stage in her conversion was she had a very close friend. She's now, in her mid-20s. Her friend was newly married and very much in love with her young husband. And the husband died in World War I. He was obviously drafted and was killed as a soldier. And this totally destroyed Edith Stein, because she had been very close to the husband also. And she went to visit the widow. And she could not understand how the widow was more peaceful inside about the death of her much-loved husband than Edith Stein was about this man. And she knew it had something to do with her Christian faith. And she said to herself, someday I'm going to have to understand this. The final stage, is more well known, which is that she was staying actually at the same friend's house one night, and she was alone in the house because the friend had gone out to dinner, and she went in the library just to find something to read, and she picked up a copy of St. Teresa of Avila's life, and she read it, and when she put it down, she said, "This is truth." And that third stage is quite well known, but those first two stages were absolutely necessary to lay the groundwork, and they were simply witnessing what it means to be Christian, what it means to be Catholic, right? The personal, frankly, I mean, it sounds corny, but a personal relationship with God that doesn't require anything, but certainly the presence of Blessed Sacrament helps. And the peace which comes from knowing what life is about and by having that relationship with God. So one of the reasons to care for the evangelization of anybody is that anybody who doesn't have this, and you all know this, right, is basically living in misery. I have a friend who's a monk in France who says, you know, if you don't believe that, just ride the subway one morning, right? I mean, see the faces on the subway. There's no way to be happy without having without Jesus, actually. And I'll skip around. I guess it's terminal. I can't help it. But because I said that, I'm going to go to another Jewish convert. I'll come back. I'll jump around. But another Jewish convert is Hermann Cohen. He's also in Salvation. He's Honey from the Rock. I don't know if you can. This picture is visible at all from the back. This is a picture of Hermann Cohen. I like it in part because he's obviously a very pious monk, but he looks very, very Jewish. You know, like a caricature almost. Here's his story, because he's a very dramatic conversion. He was born in 1821, so his life is the middle of the 19th century. He was a child prodigy on the piano. He taught himself all of the popular opera tunes, you know, when he was 5, and then by the time he was 7, he was, you know, creating his own improvisations. When he was 12, his mother took him to Franz Liszt. You know Franz Liszt, who was the greatest pianist of the 19th century. And Franz Liszt took him on as his disciple. And he started playing concerts with Franz Liszt. And then by the time he was, you know, 16, 17, he was playing solo, sold-out piano concerts in all the capitals of Europe, in Berlin, in London, in Paris. He was a real superstar. The picture I have in mind is of like the Rolling Stones or something. I mean, because in those days, I mean, in the middle of the 19th century, you know, this was the kind of stardom which today is, you know, with rock and roll. And he fell into a very dissolute life. He, of course, had tons of money thrown at him. He used to say that in one night he would gamble away more money than a normal person earned in a lifetime. I was shocked to find out there were even groupies in those days, but there were groupies in those days. He fell into, you know, all of the vices, very depraved lifestyle. I actually mentioned him earlier this weekend. And then he was in Paris, and a prince. There was a prince who was the conductor of the choir for a church choir in Paris, and the prince fell sick and asked his friend Hermann Cohen if he would fill in for him. And Hermann Cohen agreed, because doing favors for princes is one of the things that you do, and also out of his love for music. So he agreed to fill in as the choir conductor, but that choir was singing at a benediction service on Sunday afternoon at a church in Paris. And let me then read his words. And this is about when the priest elevated the host. When the priest raised the host, my tears began to flow. I remember having cried as a child, but I certainly never experienced tears like these. And while the tears flowed, a deep sorrow for my past life welled up. Spontaneously, as if by intuition, I began to make a general confession to God of all the enormous sins committed since my childhood. I saw them there piled up before me by the thousands, hideous, repulsive, And yet I also felt an unfamiliar calm which spread its balm on my soul, that the God of mercy would forgive me these, that he would take pity on my sincere contrition, on my bitter sorrow. Yes, I felt that he would give me grace, and that he would accept in expiation my firm resolution to love him above everything else, and to convert to him from then on. When I left the church, I was already a Christian in my heart. He was baptized just 3 weeks later, and here's his description of his baptism. Everything was transformed. I was hardly aware of the priest with the holy water shell in his hands. The Lord had promised to possess me at this moment. The priest was pouring the holy water with a triple gesture over my forehead and proclaimed solemnly that he baptized me in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. At the moment that the priest poured the water over my forehead, I can only describe it like electric shocks. God permitted that I, miserable worm of earth that I am, was allowed by a grace which I cannot name to see for an instant something I scarcely dare recall. My eyes were closed, but I had an inner vision, as if the Holy Spirit, as though to seal his promise, took me by the hand and revealed to my gaze, wrapped in ecstasy, that which no finite being can ever understand. I saw a great and unlimited bright space without end, for my gaze soared, plunged always further, and met no obstacle. A gentle warmth penetrated me, and in spite of the brilliant light which radiated from all sides, my gaze never tired of plunging into the ray's light, for deep within there was an even brighter light. And there stood a glorious throne, and seated on the throne was our Lord Jesus Christ, beautiful with eternal youth, with his beloved mother on his right, and around his feet a host of saints clothed in the brightest colors of the rainbow. The saints were prostrate at the foot of the throne in adoration, and yet at the same time they looked towards me and smiled kindly. Heaven and its inhabitants seemed to rejoice at my baptism, and so the poor soul of a redeemed sinner weighed in the balance of eternity. Well, dear Father, how can I be so foolish as to try to describe what I saw? Yes, I had seen the abode of the church triumphant. And this is of course one reason for reading it. This is of course what baptism is. But I also wanted to turn to Hermann Cohen, because after he entered the church, he almost immediately asked to be admitted to the Carmelite order. He became a Carmelite monk. He became a Carmelite priest. When he became a Carmelite, he took the name, or I suppose when he was ordained, he took the name Father Augustine Marie of the Most Blessed Sacrament. Because he was a convert of the Eucharist, right? He took a private vow never to preach without extolling the Blessed Sacrament. He continued traveling through all the capitals of Europe where he had given concerts, but this time preaching. And what he used to do, and he literally traveled barefoot, and what he used to do was they used to advertise a free organ concert in the church by Hermann Cohen, and a lot of people would come because, he was such a star. And then he would give a little organ concert, and then he would preach. And he literally had thousands of conversions, including one beautiful story of him doing this at a church in Paris. And a Jewish young man was walking down the sidewalk, and he saw this crowd of people on the sidewalk because they couldn't all fit into the church. And he just stopped to see what was going on, and he overheard, and he ended up also not only entering the church, but entering the Carmelite order, and ended up being given the same cell as Hermann Cohen, and becoming friends with him. And everywhere he went, he also, by the way, everywhere he went, set up adoration chapels, and he reinstituted nocturnal adoration. And as a matter of fact, since I'm in the UK, he reintroduced the Carmelite order into England after the Reformation. And the Carmelite monastery, he established, I think, about 5 Carmelite monasteries in England, and they were the first reintroduction of the Carmelites after after there were whatever happened, the suppression or the expulsion or whatever. So let me read, because basically whenever he preached that what I hope we all know, which is actually there's no way to be happy without Jesus. I don't like to sound like, a 10-year-old's, summer camp song or something. But since it's true, there's no way to avoid it. So, Hermann Cohen maybe sounds similar about it. And remember, I've been this superstar. I have traveled throughout the world. I have loved the world. I have learned one thing about the world: you don't find happiness there. I seem to hear the unanimous cry of suffering humanity: happiness, where are you? Tell me where you are hidden, and I will search for you. I have searched for happiness among the beauties of nature. I have sought it in the elegant light of salons and the deafening din of balls and parties. I have sought it through the accumulation of gold, the excitement of gambling, the hazards of adventure, and in trying to satisfy a boundless ambition. I have looked for it in the glory of the artist, the friendship of famous people, and the pleasures of the sense and spirit. Dear God, was there anywhere I failed to seek happiness? How can one explain this mystery? For human beings are made for happiness. The mystery is that most people don't know in what happiness consists. They look for it where it doesn't exist. Well, listen, I have found happiness. I possess it. I enjoy it so fully that I am able to say with the great apostle, I am overflowing with joy. My heart brims over with happiness so that I cannot contain it within me. I am overflowing with joy. I am so happy that I come to offer it to you. I come to entreat you to share with me this overflowing happiness. Not finding the happiness I sought, I was continually fleeing he who was pursuing me, until that day I entered a church, and the priest at the altar was holding in his hand something white. I looked at the little host, and I heard the words, I am the way, the truth, and the life. My God, is it possible to have lived without thinking of Jesus, without loving Jesus, without living for Jesus and in Jesus? Now that your grace has awoken me, my eyes have seen, my hands have touched, my ears have heard, my heart has tasted. Yes, I love Jesus Christ and no longer want to hide myself. I take it to be an honor to proclaim it to the whole universe. I love Jesus Christ. That's the secret of my immense happiness, which has only increased since I began to love him. It is not possible for someone who does not love Jesus Christ to be happy. We love being happy, and Jesus Christ, the only possible happiness, is not loved. We love pleasure, splendor, but Jesus Christ, the most exquisite pleasure, the splendor of eternal glory, is not loved. Oh, Jesus, my love, no greater happiness can exist than that which I experience in loving you in the Eucharist, and receiving you in my poor heart, so rich because of you. What a delicious peace, what happiness, what holy joy. Come then to this celestial banquet prepared for you by eternal wisdom. Come, approach, leave behind your little toys, your chimeras, throw far from you those lying rags that cover you. Ask Jesus for the white robe of pardon, and with a new heart, pure heart, drink at the clear fountain of his love. I don't want to even try to add anything to any of these quotes. Let me turn to another Jewish convert and his celebration or exaltation of what he found in the Catholic Church. He's a more recent convert. He just died in 1998. If you could see the other card, you can probably see this. Can you see that? And again, I like it because he looks really archetypically Jewish, like a sweet Jewish grandfatherly type. And here's his story. He was born in a little town in Hungary in 1899, a Hasidic Jew, ultra-Orthodox Jew, right? And in those days, of course, that was long before the Holocaust. There were these villages in Eastern Europe, which were like little Jewish settlements, and very religious and very insular and so forth. And he was born in one of those. He had a very pious nature as a child. All of his schooling was just religious schooling, of course. He used to go into the woods and in the silence and solitude, talk to God. Of course, he was very religious. And his family moved to New York. And in New York City, as a teenager, 20-year-old, he lost his faith. So he would walk the streets of New York in despair. And he actually spent about 3 or 4 years in the New York Public Library reading every philosophy book there. And he actually read St. Thomas Aquinas too. He read a lot of theology, trying to find the meaning of life, because without God, if God doesn't exist, life has no meaning, and if life has no meaning, there's no reason to live. And he was looking anywhere he could to find the meaning of life, but he didn't find it in any of this philosophy or literature that he read. And so he tried to kill himself. He actually tried to kill himself several times. One time he went to a park in the Bronx with a rope and threw it over a branch of a tree and to hang himself, but someone came along and he got scared, or he withdrew. I'll tell another time he tried to kill himself, because it's such a funny story. And I heard this actually. I would not have believed this, except that I heard it literally from Father Benedict Groeschel, who was friends with Charlie Rich, actually good friends with Charlie Rich. And I know Father Benedict Groeschel wouldn't lie, so the story must be true. And the story is the following: that again, when Charlie Rich was a young man and he wanted to kill himself, he went to the local hardware store to buy some rat poison to take and kill himself. And he returned to his family's apartment, a walk up on the Lower East Side, which probably doesn't mean anything to you, but it was like a Jewish ghetto in New York City. And he walks up the stairs, and he walks past the kitchen on the way to his bedroom to take the poison and die. And his mother's in the kitchen, and she calls out from the kitchen, "Charlie, Charlie, come into the kitchen. I just made some fresh bagels for you." So he figured, why not, right? Why not make her happy? I'm about to kill myself anyway. So he goes in the kitchen and he eats one of her fresh bagels. And his mother says, "Charlie, Charlie, have another. I made them just for you." So he figures, why not? He has a second bagel. And then he goes in his bedroom and takes the rat poison and lies down on his bed to die. And he wakes up a couple of hours later, violently ill. It turns out that the baking soda that's used as the leavening in the bagels was an antidote for the rat poison. So, it is an unbelievable story, but apparently it's true. So anyway, after that time, he tried to hang himself in the Bronx Park. He's walking around New York City. It's a summer day. This is the late 50s, maybe the mid-50s, before air conditioning. And it's a hot day, and the only cool places were dark churches. Right? So he goes into a dark church just to get out of the heat and to sit down. And he sits down in a pew in this empty church under a stained glass window of Jesus stilling the waters. And now I'll go to his words. So he's looking up at the stained glass window of Jesus stilling the waters, and he says to himself, "If only I could believe with the same assurance that those who come to worship here believe. If only I could believe that the words in the Gospels are really true, that Christ really existed, and that these words are exactly those that came from his own mouth. If only this were a fact, how glorious and wonderful that would be, how consoled, happy, and comforted I would be to know that Christ was really divine, that he was God's own Son come down from another world to this earth to save us all. Could it be possible, I felt, that which seemed too wonderful to be true actually was true, that it was no deception, no fraud, no lie? And all of a sudden something flashed through my mind, and I heard these words spoken in it. Of course it is true. Christ is God come down to make himself visible in the flesh. The words in the Gospels are true, literally true. The next thing I remember was that I found myself on my knees in fervent prayer and thanksgiving. From then on, the story takes on a delicacy which can hardly be expressed in the words of earth. For it has to do with a remarkable experience that took place in my whole spiritual and intellectual makeup during the few moments I kept kneeling in thanksgiving for a favor from heaven I never thought would ever be granted to me in the present life. God himself came to my rescue that day, and he himself spoke to me with his own voice, saying to me that Christ is God. Those few minutes brought such a profound change in me spiritually and intellectually that I have since that time been unable to recognize the self I had been prior to that experience. I felt deep gratitude in my heart for something which made me feel very happy. All that I know is that from that day on, the name of our Lord Jesus Christ took on a significance which it never had. There was an ineffable fragrance about the words Jesus Christ, a sweetness with which nothing can be compared. The sound of these words to this day fills me with a strange, inexpressible joy, a joy which I feel does not come from this world. I have, since my baptism and First Communion, acquired a happiness which I would not exchange for anything in all the world. It has given to me a peace of mind and a serenity of outlook which I did not think was possible on this earth. It would have, in my case, have been in vain to have been born had God not been good enough to extend me the grace to become a member of the mystical body of Christ that the Church of Rome is. Without the life Christ is, there is no life at all. It is for heaven we have been made, and for no other earthly good thing. It is to heaven every good and beautiful experience points and has in view. I became a Catholic so that I may in that way be happy, not just for a few years, but forever and ever. I became a Catholic that I may in that way get the grace to one day participate in the joys of the angels and saints in the life to come. It is to that life that the grace of conversion is meant to lead. It is meant to lead to a happiness we cannot now imagine or conceive. It is not for this life alone we are Catholics. We are Catholics that by being so, we may get the grace to live the life Christ himself is. It is for the boundlessness of heaven that we have been born. I did not become a Catholic to be happy in the present life, but in the one to come, my holy Catholic faith being the way that leads to the eternal and everlasting kind of joys they experience in heaven. It is the heaven of an unimaginable bliss my becoming a Catholic has in view. One can write and write and write and write about the story of one's conversion and never come to an end. One can never come to the end of enumerating the blessings conferred upon one by the grace of being a Catholic. The mercy of the Lord I will sing forever. What mercy of the Lord can exceed the mercy of God that enables me to believe in all the Catholic Church teaches? Can the mercy of God be made more manifest than the grace extended to us to become members of the only true Church? It is being a Catholic that matters, and not any other thing the world has to offer, however good and beautiful it may be. The Church of Rome gives us God himself. It does so in all his fullness, a greater gift than God is, a human being cannot hope to receive. We receive the gift God himself is when we receive Holy Communion. Can Protestantism and Judaism endow the soul with such a sublime gift? It is to the Church we must go to have God in the fullness he may be experienced by us this side of heaven. To become more intimately united with God than the Church enables us to be by means of the Holy Sacraments, we must take leave of this life. Now I'll read a little of his reflections on how he feels about his fellow Jews and so forth. How joyous, how tremendously peaceful the hours have been that as a Jewish convert I have spent in prayer before the Blessed Sacrament. How sorry I feel for my fellow Jews who fail to have their God in that way in their own synagogues. Who is there who would want to go to a synagogue for the warmth of heaven's joys to be had in a Catholic church? And one may ask, what is a church without Christ's sacramental presence in her? Is not that place nothing else but just another building? In ancient times, God dwelt in the Ark of the Covenant. He does so today in the tabernacle on the altar, in front of which a light burns, to tell us that the Lord and Creator of the universe is there present in the sacramental presence of his divine Son. Is there not a craving in the heart of a Jewish person for Christ the Lord, as he may be had on this earth by means of the Holy Eucharist? What can any religion have to offer which cannot give us Christ in his Eucharistic presence? I think of all this, and as I do so, I am filled with compassion for the Jewish people who have no Christ on their altar to turn to for comfort in their innumerable earthly needs, for the kind of consolation to be had in Christ alone, in His Eucharistic presence. I could go on, but that's certainly the flavor of what he writes. And this particular stream that I turned to probably about 20 minutes ago now is basically, if you remember way back then, what I was saying is one reason to evangelize, one reason to care, to spread the wealth that we have as Catholics is not only for other people's eternal life, which would be enough, but also for their happiness in this life. Because there really is no peace or no way to be happy without the knowledge that we have from the teaching of the Catholic Church, and maybe even more importantly, without the relationship with God that we have from the sacraments of the Catholic Church. So I think I'm going to, am I really going to stop there? I'm kind of tempted to stop there. It's very hard to, kind of think of anything to say that's, comes near, these extracts that I'm reading. We know, I guess this is probably the last thing I'm going to say, which is we know that the conversion of the Jews is very dear to Jesus' heart, and we know that for a number of reasons. One is, of course, he came as a Jew. His mission was only to the Jews. He even said such politically incorrect things as go nowhere among the Gentiles, but go only to the towns of Israel. When the Syrophoenician woman asked him to heal her daughter, I'm sorry, but he said it's not right to take the children's bread and feed it to the dogs. So the fact that Jesus came to the Jews, God came to the Jews through Jesus, or in Jesus, suggests that the conversion of the Jews, the evangelization of the Jews, has an importance. We know from the words of Jesus on Dominus Flevit, right, the hillside of the Mount of Olives overlooking Jerusalem, right? He said, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how often I would have gathered you under my wings as a mother hen gathers her chicks, but you would not have me." And he wept over Jerusalem. That's what the spot, Dominus Flevit, which is the name of the spot, means. And it's not impossible. I'm not saying it's certain, but it's certainly not impossible that the same kind of heartbreaking yearning that I have to see my fellow Jews realize the gift of Judaism, which is really the Catholic Church, and that all these other Jewish converts feel in their hearts, might also be because everyone has a people that they belong to and they feel particularly like an extended family. It's not too much to imagine that the Blessed Virgin Mary might feel that way because it's her the people too, right? Or Jesus might feel that way because it's his people too, or St. Joseph might feel that way because it's his people too. And finally, I talked a lot about this earlier this weekend, yet another reason to care about the conversion of the Jews is if we're pretty tired of the direction the world is taking and we want to see the second coming soon, there has to be a conversion of the Jews to see the second coming soon. The final reason to pray for the conversion of the Jews is actually simple justice, because everybody in the world owes the gift of the Catholic Church, in part, to the role that the Jews played in bringing the Catholic Church to the entire world. And so simple justice would suggest returning the favor. So that's really it. I hate to come down from these lofty heights, but I'm happy if anyone has any questions or comments or anything. Yeah?
So of course, with the Jews that have converted, especially some of the high-profile Jews like Goldstein and Venerable Francis Lieberman and Hermann Cohen and others like that, a lot of them have not only had a profound impact on the church, through their writing and their lives, but a lot of the insights they gained spiritually were decidedly profound, things that no one had had before. I was wondering, do you think because they come from that original tree, that Jewish fruit, that when they do convert, God perhaps gives unique graces to Jewish converts that Gentiles don't get, or that He's just saving for them for the benefit of the church?
Well, I'm glad that came from you and not from me.
Yeah, I know it's a bit of a
horrible chauvinism. But I actually think that's suggested by St. Paul in Romans 11, right, when he talks about the olive tree and says, if you're one of the grafted in wild olive branches, don't boast over the broken off cultivated olive branches, because God has the power to graft them in again. And when He does, they'll even be better suited to the tree because they were already a part of it. I'll also suggest, and very controversially perhaps, that in the election of the Jews there's still a grace, some kind of mysterious grace that belongs to Jewish people, because, for instance, there are about 20 million Jews in the world. It's like, less than 1/10 of 1% of the population or something. And I would be too embarrassed to tell you what percent of Nobel Prizes in the sciences were earned by Jews. They have a disproportionate, and even the bad stuff too. I mean, if you look at the worst stuff in the world, like communism, or atheism, or Freudian psychiatry, or obviously Marxism and so forth, they have a disproportionate influence over the world for both good and for evil, So it certainly seems to me like there's something that still is flowing through the Jewish people that gives them a disproportionately high profile, disproportionately high influence, and perhaps when they do become Catholics, there's that special grace then kind of flows through them in a very positive way. I basically think so.
Could you make a comment on the Holocaust?
Can I make a comment on the Holocaust? That's actually, I'm not here to sell books, but there's about 100 pages in Salvationist from the Jews on the Holocaust. Yes, I am convinced, and it's the thesis that I present in Salvationist from the Jews, that the Holocaust was a direct expression of the satanic will to exterminate the Jews to prevent the second coming. And there's a lot of evidence that it was a direct expression of the satanic will, including the fact that, according to the chief exorcist of Rome, Father Gabriele Amor, he said that without a doubt Hitler was personally consecrated as Satan. Hitler's initial springboard into public life was the Thule Society in Munich. The Thule Society was an occult society. Thule being the German version of the Atlantis myth, this continent in the Atlantic where the people had that. Oh, and by the way, if you get a copy of Mein Kampf, the last paragraph of Mein Kampf is a dedication of the work to his mentor, Dietrich Eckhart, who was the occultist who initiated him. The Secret Service was set up as an occult brotherhood. There was a tremendous amount of basically Satanism, occultism, absolutely permeating the Third Reich. And it's actually the explanation, to the extent that there is one, for the inhumanity that basically the way that people who had previously been normal people, in some sense good people, could behave so heartlessly. So anyway, the question then becomes, why should the devil launch this specific campaign to exterminate the Jews? And I actually think it's because he kind of knew that we were entering into the last stage of salvation history, and he knew that there has to be a conversion of the Jews before the second coming, and that if he exterminated the Jews, that would throw a roadblock in, or even if he blocked the conversion of the Jews, that would throw a roadblock in. And the Holocaust didn't succeed in exterminating the Jews, but it did a very good job of blocking the conversion of the Jews. Before World War II, there were probably a dozen religious orders and sodalities in the Catholic Church dedicated to praying for the conversion of the Jews. and working for the conversion of the Jews and evangelizing the Jews. There was this order in Israel, the Sisters of Our Lady of Zion. I don't know if you've ever heard of them. There was the Edith Stein Guild, and there were numerous others. And all of that dried up after World War II in the face of the Jewish objection, which is pretty ludicrous, which is, how, wasn't Auschwitz enough? How can you do this now after the Holocaust? Wasn't that enough persecution? As though the extermination of them as a race is comparable to bringing them to the Jewish Messiah. I mean, it's ludicrous, but that has had an influence. And I've mentioned this, at least privately. The only reason I can get away with doing what I'm doing is because I'm Jewish. In other words, no one can accuse me of being anti-Semitic, right? But I have been banned in at least one diocese in the United States. Actually, in one diocese, the bishop has banned me from speaking because it's so politically incorrect. I spoke at a conference there, and the rabbis of the town went to the bishop and said, "How can you let him do this? He says the Jews need Jesus too. Doesn't he know about this, and that?" And out of a desire to not offend the Jewish community, and to protect the church from the image of somehow persecuting the Jews by evangelizing them or asking for prayer for them. I don't know if you remember, obviously you remember when Benedict became Pope. Soon after Benedict became Pope, he issued the universal indult that allowed the Tridentine Rite to be celebrated, the old Mass to be celebrated without restrictions. The first year after the indult basically allowed the Tridentine Rite except during the Triduum, Holy Thursday, Good Friday, and Easter. The reason that was excluded was the old rite during the Triduum had a prayer for the conversion of the Jews, and that was too controversial. And then the next year, it was allowed during the Triduum. Pope Benedict made more delicate the prayer for the conversion of the Jews, made it less offensive to Jewish ears, so to speak. But, in other words, this desire not to offend the Jews by praying for their conversion was so pronounced within the Catholic hierarchy that it actually blocked the universal indult at the beginning. So anyway, that's an effect of the Holocaust, and that. To that extent, the devil's strategy succeeded. And one of the reasons I do this, it's a great joy to enliven people's faith, Catholic faith, for its own sake. But obviously, the commission I'm getting is the prayer for the conversion of the Jews, so to speak. Religion. Look, you guys have trains, you have buses, you have long drives, the lunch is out there. It's noon. I have to stop. I'd happily talk for another 2 hours, but I have to stop. So thank you so much.
Can I, on behalf of us all, just thank Roy very, very much for the wonderful talk he's given, the wonderful words he's given. It really comes to me very special and personal, and to really take it upon myself to really pray for the conversion of the Jews. And I really urge each one of us here to make a real commitment to remember that in our prayer, to make a real effort every day to remember in our prayer the conversion of the Jews, and to tell this to other people. So I'm saying people's right is so important for this to come about.
Thank you. I'll put these on.